It all began on a set that, at first, seemed like just another television project. A romantic comedy that no one could predict would soon turn into an international phenomenon. The cameras were rolling, the lights were blinding, and in the middle of that carefully constructed world stood two people whose lives were about to change forever. His name, CanYaman, already known for his tall frame, piercing eyes, and magnetic charisma. Her name, Demet Özdemir, a young woman with a smile that could light up an entire room and a presence that seemed both delicate and unshakably strong. When they first walked onto the set together, no one in the crew could imagine that this pairing would become legendary, not just in Turkey, but far beyond its borders. At the very beginning, their relationship was purely professional. They were co-stars, nothing more. They exchanged polite greetings, shared scripts, rehearsed lines. But from the first read-through, there was something different. The way Can looked at Demet wasn't just acting, it carried a spark, a kind of raw authenticity that caught the attention of everyone in the room. And Demet, although she remained professional, could not deny that when their eyes met, something shifted inside her. A subtle shiver. A connection that was impossible to fake. The cameras loved them together. Their chemistry was undeniable, almost magnetic. Directors didn't need to push too hard because what happened between them came naturally. The laughs, the awkward silences, the moments of accidental closeness, it all seemed too real. Soon, people on set began to whisper. Are they just acting, or is there something more? And the truth was, even they weren't sure yet. Sometimes, the line between fiction and reality becomes so blurred that even the people living it can't tell the difference. The show aired, and almost overnight, it exploded. Fans across Turkey were mesmerized. But it didn't stop there. Italy, Spain, Latin America. Audiences from different corners of the world found themselves captivated by this couple on screen. They didn't just fall in love with the characters, they fell in love with the story of Can and Demet themselves. Social media lit up with comments, edits, fan pages, and endless speculation. They must be in love in real life. Look at the way he looks at her, it can't just be acting. The obsession grew, and with it, so did the pressure. Behind the cameras, something was quietly happening. Between takes, they laughed together, shared secrets, and slowly built a private world within the chaos of production. Demet admired Can's confidence and his ability to command attention without even trying. Can, in turn, was drawn to Demet's authenticity, her kindness, and the way she carried herself with grace even under immense pressure. What started as simple admiration grew into something deeper, a bond that neither of them could fully explain. But with fame comes scrutiny. Every look, every touch, every lingering smile was analyzed by fans and dissected by the media. Tabloids screamed headlines like "Secret Romance on Set" and "Can and Demet, just friends or something more?" At first, they both denied everything. It was easier that way, safer. They said it was all just acting, just good chemistry, nothing more. But the truth was harder to hide. Because when the camera stopped rolling, their eyes still found each other. Their smiles still lingered a little too long. And the air between them always felt charged with something unspoken. One particular night would forever remain etched in their memories. After a long day of shooting, the set was quiet. Most of the crew had already gone home. Demet was still sitting in her costume, flipping through her script, while Can walked by and stopped. He looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made the air heavy. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes I forget where the acting ends." Demet looked up, her heart skipping a beat, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. Because she felt it too. That dangerous, exhilarating blur between fiction and reality. And so, the story began, not just the one written in scripts, but the one whispered between two hearts. A story that would inspire millions, a story that fans would follow across borders, across languages, across years. It was the beginning of something beautiful, something complicated, and something that neither of them could ever truly escape. The success was immediate, but no one, not even the producers, could have predicted just how far it would spread. The romantic comedy that began as a local Turkish television project was suddenly conquering the world. Within weeks of its release, international broadcasters were fighting for distribution rights. Streaming platforms jumped on board, and soon the show was subtitled and dubbed into multiple languages: Italian, Spanish, Arabic, English, even Japanese. Overnight, CanYaman and Demet Özdemir were no longer just Turkish stars, they were becoming global icons. For fans in Italy, something about their story resonated deeply. The fiery tension, the laughter, the dramatic pauses, it reminded them of their own love for grand romances, the kind that feels larger than life. Italian magazines began printing covers with Can and Demet's faces. Headlines screamed about the new couple who stole Europe's heart. Suddenly, airports became chaotic every time Can traveled. Crowds of fans waited for hours, holding posters, screaming his name, crying just to catch a glimpse of him. Demet experienced the same frenzy, with admirers following her every step, eager for selfies, autographs, or simply a smile. But what truly drove fans wild wasn't just the show itself, it was the question behind it: was it real? Viewers could not, and would not, accept that the chemistry between Can and Demet was only scripted. In Italy, fan clubs multiplied like wildfire. Social media pages dedicated entirely to their supposed relationship gained hundreds of thousands of followers. Edits of their scenes, slowed down and set to romantic Italian ballads, flooded YouTube. And with every glance, every touch on screen, the belief grew stronger: this was not acting. This was love. The media saw an opportunity and they took it. Tabloids began hunting for any photograph, any secret detail that could confirm the rumors. One night, Can and Demet were spotted leaving a restaurant with friends. The photos showed them walking separately, but the headlines screamed, "Secret dinner date?" Another time, Demet arrived late to set with a smile on her face, and gossip columns wrote, "Was she with Can last night?" The smallest gestures were exaggerated, twisted into proof of a hidden romance. And the more they denied it, the less people believed them. Can, with his strong presence, tried to brush off the rumors. In interviews, he would smile, laugh, and say, "We're just colleagues, good friends." But the way his eyes softened when Demet's name was mentioned told a different story. Demet, on the other hand, was more cautious. She valued her privacy, yet she couldn't hide the blush on her cheeks whenever journalists brought up Can. The world was watching them, dissecting every word, every movement, every pause. Italy in particular became a second home for Can. He was invited to countless television programs, award shows, and talk shows. Everywhere he went, interviewers asked the same question: what about Demet? Are you together? His answers were careful, sometimes playful, but never definitive. And with every vague response, the mystery deepened. Italian fans adored him not just for his looks, but for the romantic fantasy he seemed to embody. To them, Can wasn't just an actor, he was the perfect leading man, living out a love story too beautiful to be confined to the screen. For Demet, the experience was both magical and overwhelming. She loved her fans, she appreciated their support, but the constant pressure to explain her relationship with Can became suffocating. Every interview felt like a trap. If she smiled too much, it would be seen as confirmation. If she stayed serious, it was interpreted as heartbreak. The truth was complicated, but the world didn't want complicated. They wanted a fairy tale. And in the eyes of millions, Can and Demet were that fairy tale. Behind the scenes, their bond was growing. Fame has a way of isolating people, but for them, it created a shared world only they could understand. Long flights, exhausting press tours, sleepless nights, they leaned on each other more than anyone else. There were moments when, away from the cameras, they could finally breathe. They would laugh about the rumors, joke about the headlines, but deep down, they knew the world was only half wrong. There was something there, something fragile, dangerous, and real. Yet, with the rise of fame also came cracks in the foundation. The more people speculated, the more pressure it put on them. Could they really live up to the fantasy the world had created? Could they maintain their privacy when millions demanded the truth? fame was a double-edged sword. It gave them everything: admiration, recognition, success, but it also took away the one thing they craved the most: the freedom to simply feel without explanation. And still, the rise continued. Awards were won, new contracts signed, international magazines declared them the hottest stars of the decade. But beneath the glamour, beneath the applause, a silent question lingered between them, unspoken but heavy: what are we, really? Success has a strange way of testing people. From the outside, everything looked perfect. CanYaman and Demet Özdemir were living the dream: international fame, admiration, opportunities pouring in from every corner of the world. Fans adored them, producers wanted them, brands chased after them. But behind the glittering curtain of fame, reality was far less simple. The whispers that had once seemed harmless now grew louder, heavier, and harder to ignore. Every time they stepped outside, cameras followed. Every dinner, every coffee, every meeting was captured, analyzed, and published within hours. Headlines declared stories they never lived, twisting moments into narratives that sold papers and drove clicks. One evening, Ken left his apartment late at night. By morning, tabloids screamed, "Secret visit to Demet." Another day, Demet attended a private gathering with friends. Photographers snapped a picture of her smiling, and the captions read, "A secret smile for Can?" What the world didn't see was the exhaustion creeping in. Demet, always careful with her words, found herself retreating further into silence. The more questions journalists asked about Can, the less she wanted to answer. It wasn't that she didn't care. In truth, she cared too much. She feared that anything she said would only fuel the fire. And Can, though more open, more daring, began to feel the strain as well. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from the chaos, but fame is a storm no one can fully control. The irony was cruel: the more successful they became, the less freedom they had to simply be themselves. Their friendship, maybe even more than that, was being pulled apart by the very thing that had brought them together. The set, once their safe haven, was now filled with tension. Every lingering glance was questioned, every laugh scrutinized. Crew members whispered, journalists speculated, fans demanded answers. What had once felt natural now felt dangerous. And yet, the connection between them didn't disappear. If anything, the pressure made it stronger, more undeniable. They leaned on each other during long nights of filming, shared quiet conversations when no one else was listening. There were moments, fleeting, fragile, when the world around them faded, and it was just the two of them. In those moments, they didn't have to be CanYaman the star or Demet Özdemir the idol. They could just be two people who understood each other in a way no one else could. But cracks were forming. Fame demands sacrifice, and both of them were being asked to give more than they ever expected. Their schedules became relentless. Ken was flown across Europe for interviews and appearances. Demet juggled back-to-back projects, endorsements, and constant public scrutiny. The time they once had for themselves began to disappear, replaced by obligations, contracts, and endless flights. The distance grew, not just physically but emotionally. They still laughed together, still shared stolen moments, but there was a new heaviness in their conversations. Demet worried about her future, about being defined only by her connection to Can. She wanted to be recognized for her talent, her individuality. Can, on the other hand, felt the pressure of carrying an image larger than life. Fans wanted him to be the perfect romantic hero, and anything less felt like betrayal. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of filming, they sat together in silence. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the city outside. Demet finally broke the silence. "Sometimes I wonder if all of this is worth it." Her voice was soft, but the weight of her words hung in the air. Ken looked at her, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he said, "I think about that too." It was a confession, simple yet powerful. They both loved their craft, their fans, the magic of storytelling, but the price was high. Too high, perhaps. They weren't just losing their privacy, they were losing pieces of themselves. The public, of course, saw none of this. To the outside world, everything looked perfect. The chemistry was still there on screen, stronger than ever. Awards piled up, fan events drew record crowds, and their popularity only skyrocketed. But behind the curtain, two people were quietly struggling, caught between the story the world demanded and the truth their hearts carried. The cracks weren't yet visible to fans, but to Can and Demet, they were undeniable. Something had to give. And though neither of them said it out loud, both of them felt it. The storm was coming. At first, it was subtle. A missed smile here, a shorter reply there. To outsiders, nothing seemed wrong. On set, the camera still captured the same breathtaking chemistry. But for those who looked closely, there were signs. Can and Demet weren't laughing as freely as they once did. Their conversations off-camera grew shorter, more guarded. The effortless bond that once seemed unbreakable began to feel strained, like a string pulled too tightly, ready to snap at any moment. The media didn't know it yet, but the pressure was seeping into their private world. For weeks, rumors swirled about Can being linked to another actress during a trip abroad. Tabloids printed blurry photos, speculating about supposed late-night meetings. Demet, though she tried to ignore it, couldn't help the sting it left. She never asked him directly, it wasn't her style, but in her heart, the seed of doubt had been planted. Can, on the other hand, grew frustrated with the endless gossip. He hated how every smile, every handshake, every photograph was turned into a story. He knew the rumors weren't true, but he also knew how much they hurt Demet. And sometimes, his silence only made things worse. The first real fight between them wasn't dramatic in the way tabloids would imagine. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors. It happened quietly, almost too quietly. Late one night, after filming, Demet confronted him, not with anger, but with exhaustion. "I'm tired, tired of being in the headlines for things I never said, for things I never did." Her voice trembled, not with rage, but with hurt. Can listened, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. "Do you think I'm not tired too?" he finally replied. His voice was low, almost pleading. "Do you think I don't wake up every day to read lies about myself? About us?" There was no resolution that night. Just silence. A silence that lingered between them, heavier than any words. For the first time, they weren't on the same side. For the first time, the world outside had managed to creep into the fragile space they had built together. On set, they remained professional. Their performances were flawless, their chemistry as strong as ever. In fact, some fans claimed that the tension only made their scenes more powerful. But off-camera, they began to drift. Where once there had been late-night conversations, there were now polite goodbyes. Where once there had been easy laughter, there were careful pauses. And yet, despite the distance, neither of them could let go. There was still something unspoken, something unbreakable. At events, their eyes would still find each other across crowded rooms. In interviews, their names still carried weight when spoken together. But the warmth that once defined their connection was fading, replaced by something colder, more uncertain. The crew noticed the change. Whispers spread again, this time not about romance, but about tension. "Did you see the way she avoided him today? He doesn't talk to her like he used to." And while the fans continued to believe in the fairy tale, those closest to them began to wonder if the story was slowly coming to an end. What hurt most was not the distance itself, but how quietly it grew. There was no single moment that broke them, no dramatic betrayal, no final goodbye. Instead, it was 1,000 small cuts, a rumor left unaddressed, a word left unsaid, a smile that didn't reach the eyes. Together, they carried the weight of fame, of expectation, of a love story too big for the real world. And in that silence, they both began to realize something painful. Sometimes the greatest distance is not physical. Sometimes, the greatest distance is sitting right next to someone you once couldn't imagine being without, and feeling miles apart. It happened on a night that neither of them could ever forget. The city was alive outside, buzzing with lights and noise, but inside, the atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating. They had both just finished a long day of filming, one of those endless stretches that blurred reality and fiction together. The scenes they had shot were some of the most romantic in the series, scenes that demanded vulnerability, closeness, intimacy. And as always, they delivered. On camera, the love was undeniable. Off camera, however, something else was simmering just beneath the surface. Demet sat quietly in her dressing room, still half in costume, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was perfect, her hair carefully styled, but the woman looking back at her seemed tired, older, worn down by the weight of everything she carried. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Ken. "Can I come in?" he asked gently. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. For a few seconds, they simply stood there in silence, the unspoken tension filling the air. Finally, Ken spoke. "We can't keep going like this, Demet." Her eyes lifted to his, searching for meaning. "Like what?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Like strangers when the cameras stop rolling. Like enemies when we're supposed to be friends." The words stung because they were true. Demet swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "And whose fault is that?" The question hung in the air like a dagger. Ken's jaw tightened. He wanted to defend himself, to explain, but instead, he stepped closer. His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "You know I'd never hurt you." "Then why does it feel like you already have?" she replied softly, her voice breaking. There it was, the crack they had both been avoiding, spoken out loud for the first time. The rumors, the pressure, the doubts, all of it came crashing down in that moment. They weren't just fighting the outside world anymore, they were fighting each other. It started like any other day. The sun was out, the streets were buzzing, and the media was, as always, on the hunt for the next big story. Ken had been traveling frequently, press tours, brand events, dinners with producers. It was part of the job, part of the new reality of being an international star. But this time it was different. This time, one photograph would change everything. The tabloids published it first. A grainy shot, taken late at night outside a trendy restaurant in Rome. Ken was walking toward a car, his broad frame unmistakable even in the blurry image. But what mattered wasn't him, it was the woman walking beside him. She was laughing, leaning in close, her hand brushing his arm. To anyone else, it could have been innocent. To the world, it was proof. "CanYaman's new love?" screamed the headlines. Within hours, the image was everywhere, shared on social media, dissected in fan forums, splashed across television screens. Demet saw it not from him, but from the endless flood of messages lighting up her phone. Friends, fans, even strangers sent her the photo with captions like "Is this true?" and "I'm so sorry." She stared at it in silence, her chest tightening, her hands trembling. She knew better than anyone how the media twisted stories, how a single frame could be turned into a narrative. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the ache in her heart, the sudden, suffocating realization that maybe she hadn't been waiting for silence. Maybe she had been waiting for someone who had already moved on. That night, she didn't cry at first. She just sat in the dark, replaying everything in her mind, the late-night conversations, the hand he held in her dressing room, the call that never came. And now, this. A single photograph that shattered whatever fragile hope she had been holding on to. When they saw each other next on set, the tension was unbearable. Demet arrived early, her expression calm, composed, as if nothing had happened. Ken walked in later, the usual confidence in his stride, but the moment his eyes met hers, he froze. He could tell. She had seen it. She knew. They didn't speak at first. They didn't have to. The silence said it all. During filming, their chemistry was flawless, as if the world itself depended on it, but off camera, a cold distance hung between them. Demet avoided his gaze, keeping her focus on her lines, on the crew, on anything but him. And Ken, though he wanted to explain, didn't know where to start. How do you explain a photograph? How do you explain the truth when the world has already written the story for you? Later that evening, he tried. He found her in the corner of the set, her phone in her hand, her eyes distant. "Demet," he said softly, almost pleading. She didn't look up. It wasn't what it looked like. Finally, she raised her eyes to his, and for a moment, he wished she hadn't. There was no anger there, no rage, just disappointment, deep and unshakable. "Then what was it, Can? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already made your choice." Her words cut deeper than any headline ever could. He opened his mouth to reply, to defend himself, but nothing came out. For the first time, CanYaman, the man who always had the perfect words, the charming answers, was silent. Demet walked away that night without another word. To the crew, to the fans, to the world outside, nothing seemed different. But between them, something had broken. Something that no script, no performance, no photograph could ever repair. And yet, even as she lay awake that night, tears finally falling, Demet whispered to herself the question she couldn't escape: if he really didn't care, why does it still hurt this much? The days that followed felt heavier than ever. On screen, they still delivered the perfect romance. Smiles that melted hearts, touches that seemed destined by fate. But off-screen, the silence between them was deafening. Demet withdrew into herself. Once the lively, warm soul who filled every room with laughter, she now kept to quiet corners, her phone in her hand, her eyes distant. She spoke only when necessary, laughed only when the cameras demanded it. To the crew, she was professional. To Can, she was unreachable. She didn't ask for explanations. She didn't need to. The photograph had said enough, or at least that's what she told herself. What she didn't admit, even to her closest friends, was how much it still hurt. Not because of what the world said, but because of the silence that followed. Because Can hadn't called. Because when she needed him to fight for her, he stayed quiet. Can, meanwhile, was living his own torment. He told himself the photo meant nothing, that it was just bad timing, a casual encounter twisted into a scandal. But in Demet's eyes, it had become something else, proof of everything she feared. And he hated himself for letting her believe it. Several times, he tried to reach out. He typed messages late at night, pouring words onto the screen, only to erase them before pressing send. "It wasn't what you think. Please, let me explain. You know me better than this." But each time, doubt crept in. Would she even read it? Would it make a difference now? So instead, he said nothing. And silence, once again, became his greatest mistake. At events, he stole glances at her, searching for a sign, a sliver of the warmth they once shared. But Demet had perfected her mask. She smiled when expected, spoke with grace, but her eyes no longer lingered on him. That was what killed him the most. The eyes that once held laughter, secrets, and something dangerously close to love now looked past him, as if he were just another stranger in the room. One night, after a long shoot, he finally gathered the courage. He followed her to her car, calling her name softly. "Demet, wait." She stopped, her hand on the car door, but didn't turn around. "I need to explain," he began, his voice strained. "That photo, it wasn't what it looked like. I swear to you." Slowly, she turned to face him. The exhaustion on her face was clearer than ever, but her voice was steady. "Do you know what hurts the most, Can? Not the photo. Not the rumors. Not even the headlines." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "It's that you never fought for me. Not once. You let the silence speak for you." Her words pierced him, leaving him breathless. He wanted to argue, to tell her he had been protecting her, protecting them. But deep down, he knew she was right. He had chosen silence, and silence had destroyed them. That night, as Demet drove away, Ken stood frozen in the parking lot, staring at the fading taillights. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. He could conquer screens, captivate millions, but he couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most. And as Demet drove through the city streets, the weight of it all pressing on her chest, she whispered into the empty night, "If only you had called, just once." Time passed. Months blurred into years, and though both continued their careers with success, their story never truly left them or the fans. Then one evening, fate intervened. A new project. An international drama. The producers wanted only one pair to lead it, CanYaman and Demet Özdemir. When Demet first read the offer, her heart skipped. She wanted to refuse. She told herself she had moved on, that the past was buried. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "Unfinished." Can, too, received the proposal. He masked his reaction, but inside, his heart raced. He had imagined this reunion countless times, but imagining was safer than reality. In reality, she might still hate him. In reality, she might never forgive him. The industry called it the reunion of the decade. Fans rejoiced, social media exploded. Old clips resurfaced, old interviews replayed. The fairy tale was alive again, at least for the audience. But for Can and Demet, it was not nostalgia, it was a storm waiting to break. The first meeting was unbearable. A conference room, producers smiling, contracts on the table. Their eyes finally met, and in that second, 1,000 unspoken words came flooding back, apologies never given, calls never made, wounds never healed. Soon after, cameras rolled. The first scene was simple, a greeting, a short conversation. Nothing intimate. Yet when Demet looked into Can's eyes, her voice trembled with something real. And when he answered, his tone carried the weight of silence, of regret, of years lost. The crew applauded their flawless chemistry. But for them, it was torture. Later, when they were alone, Can finally spoke. "You're still the same," he whispered. Demet's reply was sharp. "And you're not." The tension built until one night, after filming, Demet broke the silence. "This is why I didn't want to do this project. Being here, near you, it's like reopening a wound I worked years to close." "I never meant to hurt you," he said. She laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean to, but you did. Over and over. With your silence, with your distance, with everything." Ken stepped closer, his voice raw. "If I could go back, I'd do it differently. I'd call. I'd fight. I'd never let you doubt me." Her eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "It's too late, Can." She walked away, leaving him under the harsh studio lights, drowning in words he should have said years ago. The weeks that followed were agony. Ken delivered flawless performances, smiled for cameras, but inside he was unraveling. Demet, too, wore her mask perfectly. Yet every time their hands brushed by accident, every time their eyes met, the truth screamed louder than the silence, their story was not over. Fans only made it harder. They flooded social media with edits, insisting the spark was still alive. To Demet, it was suffocating. To Can, it was cruel. And yet, they weren't wrong. Because despite everything, despite the photo, the silence, the years, something between them refused to die. One night, alone in his apartment, Can typed a message he should have sent long ago: "I'm sorry. For everything. For the silence. For not fighting. For letting you go." His thumb hovered over the send button. But, just like before, fear won. He deleted it, closed his eyes, and whispered into the night, "It's too late." But deep inside, he knew, it wasn't too late. Not yet. Because every glance, every word, every moment on set proved the truth: some stories never end. They only wait. The script for that day was deceptively simple, a confrontation between the two lead characters, raw and emotional. It was supposed to be just another scene, another line of dialogue, another display of professional talent. But everyone on set could feel it, this scene was different. The energy in the air was heavier, charged with something invisible yet undeniable. When Demet walked onto the set, she carried her script in trembling hands. She had read the lines over and over, but the more she repeated them, the more they blurred with her own story. They weren't just words on paper anymore, they were echoes of her own pain, her own heartbreak. Ken was already waiting, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark. He, too, had studied the lines, but when he looked at her, he knew no script could prepare him for what was about to happen. The director called for quiet. The cameras rolled. Demet began first. Her character accused his of abandoning her, of letting silence destroy what they had. Her voice cracked, her hands shook, but she didn't stop. And though the crew thought she was acting, Ken knew better. He could see it in her eyes, she wasn't just performing. She was speaking to him. To the man who had failed her, to the silence that had cut deeper than any betrayal. When it was his turn, Ken opened his mouth, but no sound came out at first. He forced the words, his lines scripted to be defensive, proud. But what came out was something else entirely. His voice broke, thick with regret, and for the first time in years, his eyes filled with tears. The scene continued, but the lines no longer mattered. What the world was watching wasn't fiction, it was truth bleeding through their performances. Demet's tears fell freely now, her shoulders trembling, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Ken reached out instinctively, his hand hovering, aching to touch her, to comfort her, not as his character, but as himself. Cut, the director finally called, but no one moved. The crew stood frozen, silent, realizing they had just witnessed something beyond cinema. Demet wiped her tears quickly, turning away, embarrassed by the rawness of what had just happened. She left the set without a word, retreating to her dressing room, her heart pounding. She hated herself for breaking, for letting him see how much he still mattered. Ken stayed behind, his fists clenched, his chest heaving. He wanted to go after her, to explain, to tell her that those tears weren't acting, that they were his truth too. But fear held him back, fear of being rejected again, fear of proving her right when she had said, "It's too late." Outside, whispers spread through the crew. "That wasn't acting," one assistant said quietly. "Did you see the way they looked at each other?" The dressing room door slammed shut behind her, and for the first time all day, Demet let herself breathe. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her hands still shaking from the scene she had just filmed. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. She had promised herself she wouldn't let him see her weakness, wouldn't let her real feelings bleed into the script. But the moment their eyes met, every wall she had built over the years came crashing down. She collapsed onto the small sofa, her hands covering her face. The tears came again, heavier this time, unstoppable. They weren't just tears for the scene, they were tears for every silent night, for every unanswered question, for every time she had whispered his name into the dark only to be met with emptiness. She hated herself for still caring. She hated that after everything, one look from him still had the power to undo her completely. Outside, the corridors buzzed with life. Crew members moved equipment, voices echoed, but Demet heard none of it. She was locked inside her own storm. Until a soft knock broke through the silence. "Demet?" It was him. Her breath caught in her throat. She froze, staring at the door as if it were a wall between past and present. He knocked again, firmer this time. "Please, just open the door." For a moment, she almost did. Her hand even twitched toward the handle. But then she remembered, the photograph, the silence, the words he never said. She pulled back, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Go away, Can." On the other side, Ken closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against the door. His voice was low, raw with desperation. "I didn't mean to hurt you. Not then, not now. Please, just let me explain." Inside, Demet shook her head, tears still streaming. Explanations don't change the past. There was silence. For a long moment, neither moved. It felt like the entire world had shrunk down to this single door, this thin barrier holding back years of pain and longing. Eventually, his hand fell. His footsteps retreated slowly down the hall. And with each step, Demet felt a new crack forming inside her chest. She slid down to the floor, her back against the door, whispering to herself through her sobs, "Why now? Why only now?" And though he couldn't hear her, Ken was asking the very same question as he walked away. Ken left the studio that night with a weight on his chest heavier than ever before. The city lights blurred around him as he drove aimlessly, his thoughts louder than the traffic. For years, he had told himself that silence was safer, that distance was protection. But now, as Demet's words replayed in his head, "Explanations don't change the past," he realized the cruel truth: his silence had been the very weapon that destroyed them. He barely slept. Nights became endless spirals of regret. He replayed every moment in his mind, the call he never made, the message he never sent, the way her voice cracked when she said it was too late. For the first time in his life, the man admired for his strength, his charm, his unshakable presence, felt completely powerless. He could win over nations, but he couldn't win back the only heart that had ever truly mattered. Demet, meanwhile, buried herself in work. She came to set on time, delivered flawless performances, smiled when the cameras demanded it. To everyone else, she was strong, professional, untouchable. But inside, she was a storm. Every scene with him chipped away at her carefully built walls. Every accidental brush of his hand, every glance that lingered too long, it all reminded her of what once was, and what could never be again. The outside world, of course, knew nothing of these private battles. To fans, the reunion was everything they had dreamed of. Behind-the-scenes clips leaked online, moments where Can and Demet stood too close, exchanged quiet words, or shared subtle smiles. Fans dissected every second, flooding social media with hashtags, edits, and wild theories. "They're back together. You can see it in their eyes. The chemistry is stronger than ever." The rumors spread like wildfire, reaching headlines once again. Magazines published side-by-side photos of them on set, comparing them to their past. Talk shows debated whether they were simply acting or rekindling something real. And though both Can and Demet ignored the noise publicly, in private, it was suffocating. The rumors had grown too loud to ignore. Every magazine cover, every talk show, every fan page screamed the same question: are Can and Demet back together? The producers, sensing the frenzy, leaned into it. Paparazzi were allowed closer than usual, behind-the-scenes photos were conveniently leaked, and promotional campaigns highlighted their undeniable chemistry. But for Can and Demet, the pressure was unbearable. Each day on set felt heavier, every glance loaded with unspoken truths. They had managed for weeks to avoid the inevitable conversation, but the world's gaze left them no choice. That moment came late one night, after a particularly grueling shoot. The set was quiet, the crew long gone. Only the echo of their footsteps remained in the empty studio. Demet packed her bag quickly, desperate to leave, but Can blocked the door with a look she knew too well, determined, unyielding. "Demet, we need to talk," he said, his voice low but steady. She sighed, her shoulders tense. "There's nothing left to say." "There's everything left to say," he countered. For a moment, they just stared at each other. The silence between them wasn't the same as before, it was sharper now, a blade cutting through the air. Finally, Demet turned, setting her bag down, her arms crossed. "Fine. Talk. Say what you've been holding back all these years." The challenge in her voice shook him, but he didn't retreat. He stepped closer, his eyes burning with the weight of years of regret. "You think I didn't care. You think I chose silence because you didn't matter. But Demet, you were the only thing that ever mattered." Her breath caught, but she didn't let him see. "If that were true, Can, you wouldn't have let me sit alone night after night, waiting for a call that never came. You wouldn't have let the world's lies become stronger than your truth." His jaw tightened. "I thought I was protecting you. Protecting us." Every word I could have said would have been twisted, turned into another headline. "I thought silence was safer." Her laugh was bitter, broken. "Silence isn't protection, Can. Silence is abandonment." The words landed like a blow. He stepped closer, closing the gap, his voice raw. I never abandoned you. I abandoned myself. I thought if I stayed away, if I kept my distance, maybe you'd be free of the chaos that came with me. But I was wrong. I see that now. Demet's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. Do you know what it felt like? To give everything on screen, and then go home to nothing? To smile for the world, but cry alone because the one person who should have been there chose silence? Can's hand twitched at his side, aching to reach for her, but he didn't. Instead, he whispered, I was a coward. And I will regret it for the rest of my life. The room was heavy with the weight of truth. Demet turned away, her tears falling silently. For years, she had wanted to hear these words, dreamed of him admitting the pain he caused. And now that he had, she felt no relief, only exhaustion. She whispered so softly he almost didn't hear, why now, Can? Why only now? He closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling. Because it took losing you to realize I can't keep living with silence. The words hung there, fragile, unfinished. For the first time in years, everything was laid bare. No masks, no scripts, no cameras. Just two people standing in the ruins of what they once had, wondering if it was already too late to rebuild. The night of their conversation left the air heavy, almost unbearable. Neither Can nor Demet could sleep. Both lay awake in different places, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word they had said. For years, silence had been their enemy. Now, the truth was finally spoken, and yet, it didn't bring peace. It brought a question neither of them could escape, what now? For Demet, the weight was crushing. She had waited so long for him to admit the truth, to finally tell her what she had always needed to hear. And now that he had, she found herself paralyzed. Forgiveness wasn't as simple as words. Words couldn't erase the nights she had cried alone, the way her heart had broken piece by piece. Love had been there, yes, but so had pain. Can, on the other hand, was restless, pacing his apartment as if movement could ease the storm inside him. He had always been decisive, bold, unafraid to take risks. But with her, he had failed. He had chosen silence when he should have spoken, distance when he should have held on. And now, with the chance of a second beginning flickering faintly before him, he was terrified. Because if she said no this time, it would be final. On set the next day, the script called for a romantic scene. The cameras rolled, and as Can leaned close, whispering the scripted lines, Demet's eyes betrayed her. She wasn't looking at her co-star, she was looking at him. The man who had broken her heart and was now asking, without words, for another chance. Later that evening, fate forced them into the same quiet room again. No cameras, no audience, just the two of them and the silence that lingered after too many words left unsaid. Demet spoke first, her voice steady but fragile. Do you really think we can go back? After everything? Can's eyes softened. No. We can't go back. But maybe, we can start again. She shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. Starting again isn't that easy. Love isn't enough. Trust, once it's broken, she trailed off, her eyes glistening. He stepped closer, his voice low but firm. Then let me earn it back. Let me fight this time, Demet. Not with silence, not with distance. With everything I have left. Her breath caught. For years, she had dreamed of hearing those words. But dreams weren't reality. Reality was messy, painful, complicated. And now, standing inches away from him, she felt the weight of choice pressing down on her. One path meant safety, closing the door, protecting her heart from further pain. The other path meant risk, letting him in again, trusting that this time would be different. Finally, she whispered, I don't know if I can. The words shattered him, but they weren't a no. They were hesitation, fear, uncertainty, but also possibility. And that was enough for him to keep hoping. The premiere night arrived like a storm. Flashing cameras, microphones thrust forward, fans screaming their names into the night. It was the kind of chaos they had both grown used to, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, the entire world wasn't just celebrating a project, it was watching them. Demet stepped onto the red carpet first, radiant in a flowing gown that shimmered under the lights. Her smile was perfect, but inside, her heart raced. She could hear the shouts already, "Are you and Ken back together?" And then, the crowd roared. Ken had arrived. He cut through the chaos like a force of nature, tall, commanding, impossible to ignore. The photographer screamed his name, flashes exploding around him. But even as he moved down the carpet, his eyes searched, searching for her. When their gazes finally met, the world seemed to stop. For a moment, the noise of the crowd faded, the camera ceased to matter, and it was just the two of them. Her eyes widened, caught between vulnerability and defiance. His softened instantly, the mask of confidence slipping just enough for her to see the storm beneath. The journalists noticed immediately. "Look at them," one shouted. "Can you feel the chemistry?" Another yelled, "Are you two in love again?" Demet turned her head quickly, breaking the eye contact, but the damage was done. The photographs captured it, the moment their eyes locked, the emotion that slipped through despite their best efforts. By the next morning, those pictures would be everywhere, the look that says it all. Inside the theater, they were seated side by side, as the producers had arranged. The film began, their faces larger than life on the screen, their voices echoing through the room. But for them, the real drama wasn't on the screen. It was in the silence between their chairs, in the way his hand brushed against hers on the armrest, in the way she didn't pull away. And that night, as the credits rolled and the audience erupted into applause, Ken and Demet both knew, their story was no longer theirs alone. The world had seen the truth in their eyes. The applause was still echoing when the lights came up in the theater. Ken and Demet stood side by side as the audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, calling their names. To the world, it was a celebration, a triumph, proof that their magic together was untouchable. Smiles flashed, cameras clicked, hands were shaken. But beneath it all, neither of them could escape the truth burning in their chests. When the formalities ended, Demet slipped away quickly, excusing herself from the after-party. She needed air, space, distance from the chaos. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she found herself in the quiet backstage corridor. The noise of the crowd faded, replaced by silence. She leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, finally letting her perfect smile fade. For the first time all night, she allowed herself to feel how exhausted she truly was. Moments later, footsteps echoed down the hall. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Demet, Ken's voice was low, hesitant, carrying a weight that no interview could ever reveal. She opened her eyes, her heart pounding. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," he replied softly, taking a step closer. The dim light of the corridor painted their faces in shadows, but their eyes still found each other with frightening clarity. For a long moment, neither spoke. It was as if the world outside had ceased to exist, leaving only the two of them in this fragile bubble of truth. Demet's voice finally broke the silence. "You think a premiere, applause, headlines, any of that changes what happened?" Her words trembled, her defenses rising. Ken shook his head slowly. "No. But it reminded me of something I had forgotten, how it feels to stand beside you, even when the whole world is watching. How it feels to realize nothing else matters in that moment but you." Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let the tears fall. "You don't get to say that now. Not after years of silence. Not after everything." He stepped closer, his hand twitching as if to reach for hers but stopping short. "You're right. I don't deserve to. But I can't keep pretending. Not tonight, not anymore." The dam inside her cracked. Her breath hitched as her tears finally escaped, rolling down her cheeks. She hated it, hated showing him this side of her again, but she couldn't stop. Seeing her cry broke him completely. Without thinking, Ken reached out, his hand brushing the tears gently from her face. This time, she didn't pull away. She stood frozen, trembling, her heart screaming at her to step back while her soul begged her to stay. "I should have fought for you," he whispered, his voice raw. "I should have called. I should have been there. Every day since, I've hated myself for not doing it." Her lips trembled. "Then why didn't you?" He closed his eyes, pain flashing across his face. "Because I was a coward. Because I thought silence was safer. And it destroyed us." Their breaths mingled in the stillness of the corridor. For the first time in years, no cameras, no scripts, no crowd, just them. And in that fragile moment, everything they had buried came rushing back. Demet's hand, almost involuntarily, brushed against his. Their fingers didn't intertwine, but the touch was enough to send a shiver through both of them. They stood there in silence, tears in her eyes, regret in his, both trapped between the weight of the past and the terrifying hope of what might still be. And though no words were spoken, the truth was undeniable. Behind the curtain, away from the world's gaze, their story wasn't over. Not yet. That silence didn't last. Because moments later, Kim broke it with the words she had once begged to hear. "I never stopped loving you." The world seemed to freeze again. Demet's eyes widened, her breath caught, her body went rigid. For years, she had prayed for those words. For years, she had dreamed of them. And now, when she had finally convinced herself she didn't need them anymore, here they were, raw, undeniable, spoken in the very moment she least expected. Her lips trembled. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say that now. Not after everything." But he stepped closer, desperate, his voice breaking. "I can't hold it in anymore. I tried to bury it, I tried to silence it, but it only killed me a little more every day. I love you. I always have. And I always will." Her tears flowed, her walls collapsing one by one. "Why didn't you fight for me then?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Because I didn't believe I deserved you," he admitted. "And maybe I still don't. But I'd rather spend the rest of my life proving it than spend another day pretending I don't feel this way." His confession was everything she had once needed, and yet it was also too late. Her heart ached with a dangerous hope, while her mind screamed for caution. She turned away, whispering through her sobs. "You've destroyed me once, Can. I don't know if I can survive it again." He stepped closer, his hand trembling as it touched her shoulder. "Then let me heal what I broke." For the first time in years, she didn't pull away. And in that fragile moment, both of them knew, the story wasn't finished. That night, Demet couldn't sleep. She lay awake, her heart and mind at war. Her heart clung to his words, repeating them like a prayer, "I never stopped loving you." Her mind, however, clawed back with memories sharper than knives, his silence, the photograph, the betrayal of absence. She whispered into the darkness, "Why can't I hate you?" Across the city, Ken sat in his apartment, staring at his phone. He sent her a message, "I meant it." He waited for an answer that never came. Days passed, but the storm didn't fade. Demet tried to bury herself in work, but every time she looked at him, her defenses wavered. Her heart whispered maybe. Her mind screamed never. And then Ken made a choice. One morning, he arrived early on set. The place was nearly empty, the lights dim. Demet was sitting quietly at a table, her script in hand, her coffee untouched. She looked up in surprise when he approached. "What are you doing here so early?" she asked, her tone sharp, defensive. "I came to see you," he admitted. She frowned. "We see each other every day, Can. Not like this." He sat across from her, his eyes steady. "I know words aren't enough. I know I broke your trust. But I won't let silence destroy us again. Not this time." Her chest tightened. "It already ended, Can. A long time ago." "No," he said firmly. "It didn't. We buried it, we ran from it, but it never ended. Not for me. And not for you either." Her eyes flashed with anger and pain. And what do you expect me to do? Forget the nights I waited for a call that never came? I don't expect you to forget, he whispered. I expect you to let me prove I can be the man you deserved. Her voice cracked with bitterness. And how will you prove that? His answer was simple, steady. By not leaving. Not now, not ever. Even if you push me away 1,000 times, I'll still be here. Because losing you once was the biggest mistake of my life. I won't make it twice. For the first time, she couldn't find words. Her eyes glistened, her lips parted, but nothing came out. She stood, clutching her bag, retreating toward her dressing room. Before she disappeared inside, she turned back for just a second. And though she said nothing, her eyes betrayed her, her walls were cracking. Ken saw it. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe. For days, Ken's words lingered in Demet's mind. Even if you push me away 1,000 times, I'll still be here. She tried to drown them out with work, with endless rehearsals, with carefully constructed walls of professionalism. But no matter how hard she tried, his presence lingered, silent, steady, unshakable. Ken knew that words alone would never be enough. He had spoken promises before, but this time had to be different. He needed to show her, not the world, not the cameras, but her, that he meant every word he had confessed. So he made a choice. One evening, after a long day of shooting, Demet walked out of the studio expecting the usual chaos of fans and photographers. But instead, the street was strangely quiet. And then she saw it. Parked by the curb was a car, its headlights dimmed. Ken leaned against it, his hands shoved into his pockets, his eyes fixed only on her. She froze immediately, her guard shooting up. "What are you doing here?" she asked sharply. "I told you," he said softly, "I won't leave. Not this time." Before she could reply, he gestured for her to follow him. Reluctantly, with a sigh of frustration, she stepped closer. He opened the car door, but instead of insisting she get in, he handed her something small. A folded piece of paper. Demet frowned, hesitating before unfolding it. Her breath caught the moment she saw what was inside. It was a diary page, old, worn, edges yellowed. His handwriting filled it, shaky but intense. Words she never expected to see, entries from years ago, nights when he had chosen silence. Lines like, "I want to call her, but I'm afraid of what she'll say. She deserves better than the chaos I bring. I miss her every second, but maybe letting her go is the only way to protect her." Tears pricked her eyes as she scanned the page, her chest tightening. She looked up at him, confused, trembling. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because," Ken said, his voice raw, "you always thought my silence meant I didn't care. That I'd moved on. But the truth is, I was writing to you, every night, even when I didn't have the courage to call. I never stopped thinking of you, Demet. Not for one single day." Her lips trembled. She wanted to be angry, to accuse him of cruelty, of cowardice. But the words blurred in her throat. This was proof, not for the world, but for her, that his silence hadn't been emptiness. It had been fear. For the first time, Demet felt her defenses falter. The cracks in her walls widened, and through them came something she had long buried, the possibility of believing him again. But belief was dangerous. Love was dangerous. She pressed the diary page to her chest, tears falling silently. "You don't get to fix years of pain with one page, Ken." "I know," he whispered. "That's why I'll keep showing you. Every day, every way I can. Until you believe me." And for the first time, she didn't walk away. That night, back in her apartment, Demet sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the diary page Ken had given her. The paper trembled in her hands, the faded ink whispering words she had never expected to read. Words written in secret, words never meant for anyone but himself. Her chest tightened as she read them again. "I want to call her, but I'm afraid of what she'll say. She deserves better than the chaos I bring. I miss her every second, but maybe letting her go is the only way to protect her. Each line was a knife, cutting, yet strangely healing. It was proof that she hadn't imagined it all, that the love she had felt had been real, alive, even in his silence. For years, she had tortured herself with the thought that maybe she had been a fool, that maybe he had moved on while she clung to something that was never there. But now she knew. He had loved her. He had always loved her. And yet, instead of relief, a heavier weight pressed down on her chest. Because knowing he had loved her once didn't erase the pain of being abandoned. It didn't change the fact that he had chosen silence when she had needed him most. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the page tighter. Why, she whispered to the empty room. Why wasn't love enough then? She lay back against the pillows, her body trembling with the war raging inside her. Her heart wanted to believe him, to run into his arms, to finally let go of the years of bitterness. But her mind screamed caution, louder than ever. What if it happened again? What if history repeated itself, and this time the fall broke her completely? She closed her eyes, remembering his face that night, the rawness in his voice when he said, "You are still the only thing that matters." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But believing meant risking everything all over again. Meanwhile, across the city, Ken sat in his apartment, staring at his phone, waiting for a message that didn't come. He didn't expect one, not yet. He knew this was only the beginning. But for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something dangerous, hope. Demet turned off the light, the diary page still pressed against her chest. In the darkness, she whispered to herself, "I still love him." The words slipped out like a confession, a truth she had tried to bury for years. But almost immediately, another whisper followed, trembling, broken, and that's what terrifies me the most. Weeks passed, and the unspoken truth between them grew heavier with every day. Ken didn't push. For the first time in his life, he chose patience over persistence. He showed up on set, did his work, kept his distance, but he never let her forget one thing: he was there. Always there. Demet noticed it in the smallest details. He no longer chased her with empty words. Instead, he waited. When she walked into a room, his eyes followed her, but he never forced her to meet them. When she struggled with a line, he stood quietly behind the camera, his presence steady, supportive, without a single word. When she cried after a heavy scene, he didn't approach, but she knew he was there, waiting if she ever wanted him. Slowly, the anger inside her began to soften. Not vanish, never vanish, but soften. His silence this time wasn't abandonment. It was devotion. It was patience. It was proof that maybe, just maybe, he had finally learned. One evening, filming wrapped late. The set was nearly empty, the lights dimmed. Demet lingered behind, her script in hand, her thoughts too heavy to ignore. She heard footsteps, and she didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Demet," Ken said softly, his voice careful, almost fragile. She closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. "Why do you keep doing this?" "Because I meant every word," he said simply. "Because I'll keep showing you until you believe me." Her hands trembled as she set the script down. Finally, she turned to face him. For the first time in years, she let him see her completely, her fear, her longing, her love, her pain. "Do you know what terrifies me the most?" she whispered. "That I still love you. After everything, after all the silence, after all the nights I spent hating myself for waiting, I still love you. And I don't know if I can survive that again." His chest tightened, his breath catching. He took a step closer, but stopped short, his voice breaking. "Then let me survive it for us. Let me carry it this time. Don't fight alone anymore." The silence between them stretched, heavy, trembling, alive. And then, for the first time in years, Demet didn't walk away. She let him take her hand. It was small, almost nothing, a touch, a fragile connection. But in that single moment, the world seemed to shift. The years of silence, the photographs, the tears, the endless war inside them, all of it quieted. Not gone, not erased, but quiet. Demet's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Don't ever let me go again." Can's own tears glistened as he squeezed her hand gently. Never. Outside, the world would keep talking. The headlines would keep spinning, the fans would keep guessing, the cameras would keep chasing their story. But in that quiet, fragile moment, none of it mattered. For the first time in years, they weren't actors. They weren't stars. They weren't the myths the world had created. They were just two people, broken and mended, scarred and hopeful, standing face to face with the truth they had both run from for far too long. And in the end, it wasn't the applause, the rumors, or the cameras that defined them. It was this, her hand in his promise in her eyes, and the silent understanding that their story, though bruised and battered, was finally beginning again.